Welcome back, guys. Oh boy. Thingy, so today, this is where I actually get to the part that I am excited about, because I really like talking about this side of things. Today we're going to talk about additive synthesis in sound design, and this is going to be a big deal, because while additive is just the next step up from subtractive thingy, with subtractive I kind of told you a lot of things, but I didn't really explain how you get to places. Like, I didn't really get into the nitty gritty of how those sounds end up sounding like they do to us, because that's something I don't think is important until you start looking into additive synthesis. I would say subtractive synthesis is more good for if you want to mess around and just see what you like, or if you already have heard something and you know you can easily recreate with that. Subtractive synthesis, that's a good idea. But additive synthesis is more good for if you've got a specific sound in mind, then it'll be good to use it. So first of all, you can go and add, but you can also right click this and go and replace. You need to open up this synth here called Citrus. Now most people would say that Harmor over here is the premium in FL Studio additive synthesizers, but I want you to open up Citrus for now, because it's definitely going to be way easier to explain with Citrus, because the way Harmor visually represents additive synthesis makes it seem really confusing in my opinion and really hard to follow, whereas Citrus allows you to have much more control, and that will give you something that sounds like this. This is just a pre-made preset that it automatically opens on, so you need to click on, in fact, sorry, I'm going a bit fast. Once you open it, you have to click on this arrow, go on presets, and go on default. By the way, these ones here shouldn't be here for you, these are ones that I've made. So default, and the default is just a sine wave. Now I was talking about how sine waves are technically the most simple kind of sound, and then it goes to triangle, and then saw, and then square, and this is a pulse wave, it doesn't really matter as much. But yeah, and you may be wondering why that is. Well, here's the thing. If I get up something that will show a frequency spectrum on this, so don't worry about what I'm doing right now, you don't have to be able to do it yourself yet, but I'm just going to do this quickly so that you can see what's going on. Oh, whoops. As you can see, it only does one line on this frequency spectrum. Whereas if I have a triangle wave, hang on, some other lines are starting to appear. And some more. Well, actually, I don't know why square is after saw, because technically saw has more than square. Well, it does. Anyway, so you may be wondering then about what this all means. So basically, a sine wave, this is what a sine wave looks like when it is just being one frequency. It is being that one constant frequency. So that's why it's the simplest kind of sound, because it's a pure tone. It's just that frequency. Now, here's the thing. Obviously, we can still tell what note you're playing, unless you create a really weird synth that is probably a bit of a mistake, unless you're doing some cool modulation stuff with it, or it's a sound effect. You can tell what note is being played when you hear an instrument play a note. However, technically, it's playing more than one note. The note that you pick out, that you identify as the note it's playing, is going to be the fundamental, which is usually the lowest pitch out of all the pitches that make up the sound, although technically it's the loudest. Now, the reason why I say usually the lowest is because the lowest, in most natural sounds, the lowest pitch frequency is the loudest, and as well as that, if you have a pitch that is lower than the fundamental, which again, because technically the fundamental is just the loudest, it can happen, then it gets a little bit complicated. So for now, since most sounds will be like this anyway, let's just say the fundamental is the lowest pitch, and we'll get into cases where it isn't later. So if I play, I don't know, there's piano presets for this, isn't there? You don't have to do what I'm doing here, I'm just doing it to get an example. I swear there's piano presets for this. I feel like there would be pianos. Guitar. Yeah, piano. I don't know, realistic. Okay, so it's not. It sounds more like a guitar than a piano, but you get the point. You can see this is doing multiple frequencies, and since pitches are just frequencies, that might make you think, hang on a minute then, doesn't that mean this is technically playing chords? And in a way it kind of is. That is actually kind of how timbre works. The way that an instrument sounds is technically, in a weird sense, actually just chords of frequencies, but obviously we don't usually think of it like that because it's just part of the sound. But anyway, so if we go back to the default, so that's why this is the simplest possible sound you can make, a sine wave. So then obviously from there we build. And that's how we get these other waves. So basically the way additive synthesis works, I just realised I don't think I pointed this out explicitly, but when you open this you want to click on operator 1, and if you go into this oscillator tab it will show you this window. Here we have this weird grid thing where every now and then there's one that's extra highlighted. If we just zoom in a bit, these are harmonics. So the number associated with each harmonic says how many times higher pitch it is than the fundamental. So obviously harmonic 1 is the fundamental. Harmonic 2, that's going to be double the pitch. So just to prove that, if I turn on harmonic 2 and turn off harmonic 1, you can see that we get 2 sine waves within the same amount of space. Third one we get 3. You get the idea. Seventh one we get 7. So essentially what you do is you can use this to make shapes. You can make wave shapes out of sine waves by, well, just adding together harmonics. You can kind of shape this to whatever I want. Now obviously I'm not going to have a perfect idea of exactly what it's going to look like by me doing it this way, but obviously I will get a kind of feel for it. And even if you need a more kind of direct method, you have kind of this tension knob where you can bend it outwards or inwards, and this skew knob where you can kind of focus it more in the middle. So there's some decent tools here for being able to create whatever you want. There's also the sine shaper, which is a bit weird. I don't really get it, but it makes it more like it makes a sine wave kind of out of what you've already got. I don't know. I actually do not know what this pre-filter knob is, and noise. So anyway, oh yeah, by the way, that's what it sounds like now. Which probably sounds a little bit better. And if we look in here, oh, but you can see there's more frequencies there now. So yeah, now I imagine you are a little bit confused at this point, because how does adding together sine waves make things that don't even look circular when this is very circular on its own? Well, that's due to a little thing called phase cancellation. I was thinking about whether I should leave this until later, but this is a very good principle of sound design for you to understand. It will make it way easier for you to understand why certain techniques make certain sounds. So I think I should tell you this now. So basically, let's just take a moment to create a new pattern and to just play some pretty low note on it. Put it into the playlist, and don't worry if you're a little bit lost at this part, because again I'm just doing this for example. What I'm going to do now is select this, click on this little arrow, tools, consolidate playlist selection from selection start. And we're going to get a recorded like audio file of that thing now. You might struggle hearing that because it is very low pitched. If you have headphones on, it should be much better, or just good speakers. But yeah. So the reason why I got a really low pitched one is so we can kind of zoom in and actually see the sine waves moving instead of just this block because it's going so fast. So this is what we have. I'm going to put that bit off. That's what we have. And again, hopefully you can hear that. And if we put a copy of it down here, right click, make new unique, now it's considered a different sound. The only reason I did that is because I'm about to change this one, and if I hadn't done the right click make unique thing, then it would have it would have thought it was the same sound. It would have changed both of these. So what I'm going to do now is, I thought there was a switch where I can just invert the phase. I don't think it was that. Oh, reverse polarity, there it is. So now, you might notice that whenever, I've flipped this round, so whenever this goes up, this goes down, and vice versa. Now, do you know what's just happened? Well, you might have struggled to hear the sound in the first place, so maybe you didn't realise what's just happened, but even if you can't hear it, you can see the difference. Look up here. If I turn this off, it comes back, and if I turn it on, it goes away. And it's not like this is just muting this, because if I get rid of this, the opposite, but the same thing happens again. So what's going on here? How come we've got two sounds playing, and neither of them are making any noise? It's because of the way that sound waves work. So basically, when you look at these oscilloscope things, one thing I always was confused about is why the middle is 0 volume and then they go up and down. If both up and down mean, well, volume. Well, that's because technically there's like positive and negative volume in kind of quotation marks. And you can hear both types and they sound exactly the same, but when both a positive and negative volume is played at the same time, they will cancel each other out. So if you have something that is, I don't know, -2 and +3, then the result will be +1. You get the point. So because these are exactly the same at all times, it's just that the other one will always be the opposite amplitude. That means that no matter what, these will always add together to make 0 decibels and make no volume. Now I say volume kind of in quotations, because we're talking in terms of this kind of graph here. And the reason why there's kind of like quote-unquote positive and negative volume is just because, you know, sound is just vibrations that we pick up with our ears. And obviously movement can go in one direction or another. So you can think of plus and minus as left or right or up and down. It doesn't really matter. It's basically just two opposite directions of movement. So yeah, that's how we get this kind of effect. So that is how we can create shapes that aren't at all sine waves from sine waves, by having them cancel out with each other. As you can see, if I add a second sine wave to this, it doesn't make the sound wave louder. It just changes its shape to have this little bump in the middle and to kind of push the start and the end a bit closer to the edges. Because that's what happens if we have a copy of this with double the frequency cancel out with it. Because obviously it's the same frequency at first, but because this one's a higher frequency than this one, eventually they won't be matched up anymore and they'll start fighting against each other. So yeah, that's how you can create basically any shape with sine waves if you have enough of them. And in fact, I'm about to show you something right now. There's a very specific way that sound waves are created. So if we go to triangle wave here, I don't know the formulas for all these off the top of my head, but if you right-click your shape, you can click convert shape to sine harmonics, and it will make that shape exactly the same, except it's now made out of sine waves. And there we go. This little thing on the bottom is the phase. So basically what that means in this context is if the phase is at 50%, instead of it starting from the wave being here, it will start from the wave being here. So for that harmonic, it will have the sine wave start going down instead of start from going up. But yeah, so you can see they've got this kind of calculated series where it's like, okay, I'll have half the volume for the third one, and then a little bit less, and a little bit less, and a little bit less, and it's every odd harmonic to create a saw wave. Not a saw wave, a triangle wave. And then there's a square wave. Oh yeah, sorry, I gotta get rid of all these first. Oh man, what have I done? Okay, there we go. We've got a square wave, and if I right-click shape to convert sine harmonics here, it's basically the same deal. All the odd harmonics, except the volume goes down more slowly. You can see it's a little bit sharp here. And that's because, well, technically this is the way you would create a sine wave, a square wave out of sine waves. As you can see, it's not hit 0 volume yet by the time we hit here. Technically, to make it a square, like an actual square, like perfect, we'd have to have way more sine waves. Like, it's one of those things where we're basically just getting as accurate as we can because we basically need an infinite amount of sine waves to be able to perfectly replicate it. But still, it will sound basically exactly the same. That's how it sounds like that, and this is how it sounds on here. So you can't really hear a difference. Anyway, so yeah, that's how additive synthesis works, and there are a few additive synthesizers in FL Studio. I'm just going to quickly point out other synthesizers that work like this. There's also Morphine over here. And I haven't really personally used this synth that much, but I feel like there might be potential in this, because I don't see people use this synth really like at all. And to be fair, it does seem a little bit difficult to use, but there we go, reset program. So we've got the same idea here with sine waves. What's interesting about this is I believe it's this morph and mix thing. We can now, as well as having generator A, what we've just done, now we've got a new sound in generator B. Maybe I'm going to make this like kind of like a low pass saw wave. You can kind of swap between these, and I believe you can. There's some way to. Oh, it's right click. You can hear. You can kind of swap between them the two. I don't know that much about Morphine because I've really just messed around with it. I haven't actually used it in any of my tracks yet. I've tried to. It's a bit difficult for me to get used to, but it's one that you could definitely consider looking at. It's not the top pick for most people though. The top pick for most people in terms of additive synthesizers is Harmor, and I can see why. I personally prefer Citrus, but you know what you're gonna do. Now you might notice that Harmor's a bit big, especially if you have this little menu open. It's gonna be taking up a lot of space. So to solve that, well, it's still gonna be a bit of a problem. But to solve that, you want to go on this arrow and tick detached and wait a second. Oh, I actually did it quickly. Usually for me there's a lag spike when I do that. And there's the synth. By the way, if you're wondering why it takes up so much of the screen, it's because really I think this is made for people who have bigger monitors, and I don't have a very big monitor, so it barely fits. But it fits. So you'll have this admittedly pretty cool sound open when you first open it, but again, click that arrow, go into presets, default, and you'll have a saw wave, and this is the default way that this Harmor is. So Harmor is an additive synthesizer, but you probably don't see anything on this immediately that makes you think, oh yes, this is an additive synthesizer. It's probably a little bit overwhelming, to be honest, but this is basically how it's an additive synthesizer, and this is why I definitely didn't want to start explaining it inside Harmor, even though I think that Harmor is a good tool for it, and most people would say that Harmor is the best additive synthesizer you can get in FL Studio, because this is where you do the harmonics. Yeah, this is a really inefficient way of doing it, in my opinion. This is just really unintuitive and confusing. So basically, this thing here is the first harmonic, that's the second, that's the third. This whole grid is a representation of harmonics and volume. But you can't really pick out individual harmonics and say, I want you, I don't want you. Not unless you painstakingly go through the process, like... And how long does that go on for? Yeah. I really don't like the way they've done this. But I can teach you a few things you can still make inside Harmor. And Harmor is still very good, especially for super saws, which I'm going to quickly go over what those are as well, even though it's not really part of additive synthesis. It is part of what you're going to do with Harmor. And, well... I imagine I should teach you then here about super saws. They're not that confusing, don't worry. So anyway, yeah, so this right here is a saw wave because it has every single harmonic, and of course a saw wave, as you saw earlier. Actually, did I skip over saw? I did skip over saw wave earlier. Oh, well, I mentioned how the square wave is all the odd harmonics. The saw wave is basically the same as a square wave, except you can include all the even harmonics, and the volume goes down in the same ratio. So I think what this thing does as well is I think it automatically accounts for the whole ratio thing, which I think that should be something that's toggleable, because while that is a good idea, because most people don't know the ratio off by heart and it's annoying to try and have to do it, also, like, that means that technically every single for whether you're on the left side or the right side of the graph, you're talking about different amounts of volume by placing the this at the same point, which obviously makes it confusing and all that. So I feel like they could have found different ways to go about this, but as much as I'm ripping on it right now, Hammer is a good synth. So I can tell you though how to do a sine wave, a saw wave, and a square wave, and kind of a triangle wave. So as you can see, this is how you do a saw wave. It's literally just a straight line. Now, a square wave, basically I would recommend if you ever need a square wave, just go to the default and copy this, because they've created this kind of specific curve right here where it leaves out all the odd harmonics automatically. And it's a pain to try and get this exactly right yourself doing it manually. Oh, by the way, if you're wondering how they did this, I haven't even really talked about this whole graph kind of interface yet, have I? So yeah, a lot of synths in FL Studio have a kind of graph interface like this, and how this works is that you right-click to place things, and you can single-click to drag them, and you can click and drag these points to give them tension, which kind of curves them in one direction or another. But then if you right-click the points, you get all these different options as well. Now, you're not going to use most of these. The single curve, there's 3 types of it, so you can get these weird curves like these, but I don't really like them. I much prefer just to use the normal single curve, because that one's actually kind of a proper curve. Double curve is probably one of the only other ones you'll likely use. You can just do this with 2 single curves, but obviously this is just faster sometimes. I actually don't know what half sine is. Oh, I suppose that could be useful. I literally forgot that was there. Stairs is funny, but you're probably going to not use it that much unless you've got like a very specific sound that you want to kind of be a bit jumpy. Smooth stairs. Oh yeah, I forgot this existed. Yeah, I've never used that. But anyway, there's hold as well, which is if you're just snapping it up and down, it can be make it a bit faster, but overall it doesn't really do much. But then the 2 other options that are actually probably going to be useful is pulse, which kind of juts it up and down like that, and wave, which does the same, except instead of it being kind of a square shape, it's this triangle shape. And if you turn it to full and then keep pushing it, it'll roll over and do the same, but as a sine kind of shape. So basically the way that they've created this shape is they've created one of those sine wave kind of things and do not a whole... Wait, I just realised this is just above that normal volume. Is that... Yeah, it's just above. Why is that? Honestly. So yeah, but yeah, so I basically recommend just copy this and copy this if you want to create a saw or a square wave. However, if you want to create a sine wave, that isn't too hard. All you have to do is... Okay, this is actually a bit nagging me a bit there. There we go, and done. Because that is just the volume of this first harmonic is on, and nothing else is. And that's what a sine wave is. And you can switch between these 2 waves. There. So, as for the rest of these... okay, so there's a lot of stuff here, but don't worry, honestly, a lot of it is useless. Man, I'm really making this synth sound bad. It's not bad. I have my gripes with it. Let's turn it back to a saw wave. Okay, so we're not going to go from top left to bottom right, because honestly, see, this isn't, I must admit, again, I don't want to complain about this synth that much, because again, I don't want to stop you from using it, because it is a decent synth, but I don't understand why these phase knobs are over here, because these literally, if I remember right, do not do anything until you start messing with this. So, like, why did you put it, like, right there? Anyway, so yeah, here there is the subharmonics, which, if you're wondering what that's all about, oh yeah, you can click this arrow to extend out a thing that will show you the frequency spectrum of the sound you're playing. So, if I had this subharmonic, you should see what this does. There is now a lower harmonic, and then there's also this subharmonic. Actually, let's get rid of the last one so it's clear. And then, so those are your three subharmonics, and this is just volume for them. This, I do not know. This, oh. Huh. I think, I'm not going to get into this because I don't know for sure what this is, but like, in fact, no, that would be it, wouldn't it? Okay, so I think this is basically a bit of a compressor built into Harmon. I'm surprised I never noticed this. Basically, what I think this is saying is you choose a point where the where if the volume gets above that point, you start pushing down the volume. Effects dry mix. Is that for like the whole effects section built into Harmon? Because there's an effects section over here. I haven't used a lot of these, to be honest, because I mostly just use Harvest for super saws. Time domain value, honestly, what? Yeah, a lot of this stuff is not that useful. But then over here, this is more familiar territory. These are all filters, and although there's a lot here to look at, and that might seem a little bit intimidating, just remember that most of these are just different versions of low passes, band passes, and high passes. There's also band stop. That is just the opposite of a band pass. As I mentioned before, a band pass is where it only keeps the frequencies around the cutoff point. A band stop only gets rid of the frequencies around the cutoff point. What is interesting though here, although most of these are pretty kind of standard, is the custom shape 1 and 2. Which in here, you can basically draw a graph and make your own filter. So here, every single time these dots hit the bottom of the graph, that's a point of frequencies, like relative to the cutoff point on this, where I'm just reducing all their volumes. So which is pretty cool to mess around with. As well as that, there's keyboard tracking over here. So, okay, without keyboard tracking, you can see that the filter doesn't move, but with keyboard tracking, oh, it's not a great example, you can see now that's a better example. But yeah, basically, when you play a note, it will move the filter relative to what pitch that you're playing. You want to have this on 100% most of the time, if you're having it, because that will actually link it up to the note you're playing. If you have it on 200%, it will kind of overdo it, but you can do that on purpose for some interesting effects sometimes, where it will kind of go overboard and move it around more than it should to fit the note that you're playing. But if you want a lot of movement in the filter, that could be interesting. Similarly, you might notice this knob can go backwards, and that will just do the opposite. The filter will go lower when you play higher notes, and vice versa, and you can go to -200 as well. But usually you're just going to want to put that on 100% or 0%. It's usually if you're just feeling a bit weird. Now I've only just noticed now, but the low pass on GMS doesn't have a width knob, which is kind of weird because I think most low passes do, but this one does. Now a width knob. Oh, whoops. To demonstrate this better, I should probably switch to a low pass again for a second. So if I set this to the width to 0, as you can see, it basically instantly cuts this off. There's very little warning before this goes to 0 volume. However, if I set this width to 100%, you can see there's a much longer kind of period for it to go from full volume to 0 volume. So that's basically what the width of the filter does. And it's very interesting to mix width with custom filters. So yeah, then there's also, going back to low passes, just the normal kind of thing. Put it there for now. Oh, I think I just put in a keyboard shortcut by accident to do that, but I don't know. Thingy. Then there's also resonance over here, which of course, as I mentioned, will increase the volume around the cutoff point, as you can see by this graph. The resonance in Harmon can also have a width, which that one actually is a bit rare. You don't usually see the resonance being given a width to. It's a bit weird, but it's interesting. There's actually a lot of interesting like resonance kind of options here, which kind of distribute the volume in slightly different ways. Wormhole's probably one of the more interesting, because it kind of creates a split where on the actual point you're actually reducing the volume, not increasing it, but then around the points you're increasing the volume. So Wormhole's quite interesting. And there's also noise under this special tab, and this one's kind of interesting. Isn't that cool? So what noise is basically doing is it's basically just picking random frequencies to focus on, and the width is actually not controlling the width, it's controlling how quickly it swaps frequency. So yeah, that's really interesting stuff right there. So Harmon definitely does have some good stuff. It definitely has good filters. This, I believe this is just kind of another way you can do ADSR. Just a sec. Yeah, I don't know why they do this. Yeah, and I don't know. I don't really know about this section. I don't know what it means by blur, and I've never really found a use for it. There's tremolo, which, if I remember right, is basically volume, like... Yeah, it switches between the right and the left ears. It switches between ears really quickly. Then Prism, I'm not going to touch this until later, but it's basically a way you can mess with the way where like different harmonics are placed. If we go on edit articulator, oh no, that's prism amount, harmonic prism, yeah, here. So that's kind of, this is kind of a graph where like the left represents lower harmonics and the right represents higher harmonics, and the position up or down is you pulling their frequency up or down. So that's kind of why this creates this weird shape. Anyway, then there's the harmonizer, which is actually useful. The harmonizer, you basically you kind of increase the volume of certain key harmonics. And as you can see, the width is kind of controlling how high the reach of this volume boost goes, and the amount is just the amount you mix it in, and the strength. I don't really get the difference between the amount and the strength, but the strength obviously just makes it stronger. This is at 25 before. Now this stuff over here, I don't remember exactly how it works, but essentially this is how it determines which harmonics to boost, and you can mess around with this. At the moment I think it's just every second harmonic. Or is it every... Yeah, I think it's supposed to be every second harmonic, which is what's with the ×2. But if you changed it to ×3... There's also a plus mode. I don't really get how the plus mode works, but yeah. Then there's unison, just like we had on GMS, except this one only goes up to 9 voices, which you may feel cheated on, but actually that is quite a lot. It's not many synthesizers have up to 16 like unison voices. 9 is kind of more normal. And the big reason why a Harmor is so laggy at times and it only has 9 unison voices is because what's special about Harmor, the kind of gimmick behind it, the reason why it's supposedly so good, is because it gives you immense control if you really know what you're doing. Because every single individual harmonic is rendered out. Like usually the additive synthesizers will just take the sine harmonics you put in and then figure out what waveform that would make and then just output that waveform. But this one actually outputs like every single individual sine wave you put into it. So this is technically, even with no unison, I'm playing 256 sine waves if I'm playing a solo wave. With 9, I'm doing 9 times 256. You can see why that gets laggy now. The reason why they render them out all individually is so that with these graphs, with these effects, you can have different amounts of power that those effects have over different harmonics. And, you know, you get the point. So that's kind of the special thing with Harmor. You can have stuff like harmonic unison pitch. This thing here is basically a multiplier for the pitch thickness for unison, which is like the difference in pitch between each copy. So you can have it that certain sine harmonics have more unison voices, or more difference between each unison voice, or less difference. In fact, is it just pitch, or can you do it for panning too? It's just pitch. There's harmonic phase as well. So you can put all the sine waves out of phase. You can see this is weirdly changing these shapes. In fact, that's basically because we're changing where the sine waves would start from. For each individual one that makes up the saw, whereas usually it would obviously make up usually it would start from here and it would go up first and then go down. You know, we're messing around with that by messing with this harmonic phase. So yeah, that's kind of the gimmick of Harmor. Actually, I don't know what harmonic randomness is. I can only imagine that's like a randomizer for how much volume each harmonic has. That's weird though, I actually never noticed this one. So yeah, there's also a local EQ built into it so that you can boost certain frequencies, and you can even see the effect that has on the waveform up there. This also goes very high. That's a thick boy. Anyway. So yeah, Unison has all these different kind of modes in it. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know much about these. I would mostly say just use classic. Blurred can sound a little bit smoother sometimes, but I don't really know the deal with it. Uniform sometimes sounds a bit more kind of solid, but again, I don't know what's up with it. I don't know what random does. And Hertz mode, all I'm going to say is if you want some weird kind of pitchy stuff, like messing with pitch kind of stuff, then I would use it, but otherwise, no. That's what unison usually sounds like. This is what it sounds like in Hertz mode. You can hear some weird stuff going on there. So here I'm changing how much this knob is turned on for each harmonic, which is why it kind of makes the whole thing seem different. Now I've applied these settings, you can actually see when I move this knob around where these frequencies move is different for each individual one, because they've all got different amounts of this effect being applied to it. This is how you get into making some weird stuff. So you probably could figure out what the rest of the knobs are, but just in case you've gone, this is just panning, so you can have the voices further on the left or right, as I mentioned earlier. This is obviously pitch thickness, the difference in pitch between each one. The only one you might not be as confident with is the phase knob. The phase knob, essentially what this is, let's put this back onto normal mode. We can put this in zero. So this is actually a good thing for me to talk about, because this is something I wanted to talk about now that you know what phase cancellation is anyway. You might have noticed that if you ever have any kind of unison on something and the phase is 0, which I know that you probably aren't using it that much on GMS since it kind of automatically sets the phase to something that sounds nice, but if you do turn on that unison phase retriggering thing and you set the phase to 0, you'll notice it'll sound like this. You'll kind of have this hit where it's initially, in fact, let me turn up the voices. In fact, what I'm going to do is I want to keep this for later because we might bring this back later, but I'm going to bring up now this little thing. You can basically have two different harmonies at the same time inside the same one. And that's obviously the mix between them. If you press this button while that's highlighted, everything I change on here will be changed on here, and vice versa. But we're going to turn off A for now and just switch to B, so I can do this with a normal saw wave without all this weird harmonic unison pitch thing happening. So you may be wondering what's going on with this sound, because if I put it like this, actually it still sounds a bit weird. You know, just in general it sounds weird. Just like this. It sounds much more normal, but like this, you can tell that when I first press the note, there's kind of a burst of volume, and then suddenly it goes from low to up, and all these higher little things kind of flying by your ear in a way. What's going on here is phase cancellation magic. So oh boy, it's about that time again. It's time we reopen Paint. So basically, what's going on here is something that happens when you have all these sine waves. Well, they are sine waves technically, but it doesn't have to be sine waves. When you have all these sound waves, all copies of the same thing essentially, but as I say, they've all got a slightly different pitch. Now, I was careful there to not have any other things there. They didn't have a different phase, and they didn't have a different panning. All that was different about them was the pitch. But we had multiple copies with slightly different pitch, which I'm going to demonstrate to you now why that has an effect. And it's kind of a similar thing to the whole RM modulation thing from before. So, we're going to have... Is 500 too much? No, it's not. Right, okay. So, in fact, I'll do this with lines. So we have our saw wave here, and it's going to go like that. Oh, do I have to tick the box every time? That might get annoying. Okay, you know what? I'm just going to draw the rest of them with the pen, but I'll finish doing this one in the lines. Okay, there we go. So, basically, if we have another copy that's almost the same, it's mostly the same, but its pitch is slightly different, say this one's got a slightly higher pitch, it would probably look like this. Oh, well, I kind of messed that up there, but still. And here's the thing. You'll notice that while at first these practically match up, the longer this goes on for, the more these don't match up until this one's spiking while this one's at 0 decibels. And these are both being played at the same time, so they're both combining with each other. So that means here, at the start of the sound, it's like, oh, well, you're both at 100, so that should be, like, I don't know, there's not enough space for me to do it that way, I don't know why I did it that way. You're both at 100, so on this kind of very high spectrum, say that these markers is where 100 would be for each individual in these. It starts out like, oh wow, you're all the way up here. But then, by the second one, when it's like trying to spike up again, it won't quite do it correctly because it won't go as high because it will start to go up, but then it will realise, hang on a minute, this one has already peaked and is already going down. This one isn't at full. So this one won't be as loud as the last one. And you'll have this kind of going on effect where each next one is going to be quieter and quieter than the last one. Until if you hold it long enough, it will loop back to where it started. And it'll be like you just press the note again. So yeah, you get this weird effect whenever you have all these copies that are exactly the same except for a small change in pitch. Where when you first press the note it's louder, and the longer you hold it, it'll start to get quieter, and then it will slowly fade back to being loud again. You can kind of see all these mini saw waves being created within the saw waves, and this is all the kind of inaccuracies, the kind of ways that they don't match up perfectly, slowly moving and creating these shapes. So yeah, that'll be a trick. That's bases that use those are called respaces, which is short for resampling, because usually you would do this because back when this was new, you would obviously do this the old-fashioned way, taking a recording of one and taking a recording of the other and changing the second recording. Obviously now we have unison though. So yeah, that would be called a respace. So anyway, let's actually get back to where we were. We kind of went on a bit like that there. There's a vibrato knob here, pretty simple. You turn it on. You can change the speed it. Now, another thing that I just realised I didn't mention yet is if you right click any knob, well almost every knob in Harmor, and go on Edit Articulator, it will open up this menu over here, and these will essentially be graphs that determine how much you want that knob turned on. And if you're on envelope mode, this will be relative to when you press the note and how long you hold it down for. Now just a word of warning, you might notice that doesn't have any effect on the sound. Basically these grids, at first I was confused because I thought the tops of these grids was 100% on these knobs. The tops of those grids is whatever you have the knob at. So if I have this at full, then that does mean that the top of this grid means full. But if I have it here, then it means the top of this grid means half. And obviously the bottom always means the bottom, it doesn't matter where you have the knob. can kind of see that we're kind of fading it in. There's also other options. You can do it by, if you want to disable it, you just click on this. And I'd recommend clicking on tempo to make it so that these lines actually match up with the BPM of your track. So this is a beat, and this is a second beat, and that's a bar. Otherwise it doesn't make much sense to use it in out of tempo mode. But anyway, you want to click on that to disable it if you don't want it. Let's enable the LFO and see how that sounds. You can change how much the LFO moves up and down like this, and you can invert it, but you will I shouldn't have made that many points, but you will most likely just be using the knobs on the bottom to control the shape of the LFO most of the time, unless you want an LFO that kind of fades in. In fact, I'll do that in a second, but I'll do it normally first, so turn the speed up. So we've got an interesting sound here. Let's make these a bit more curved. We kind of have the vibrato fading in and out really, really, really quickly. What if we want this to fade in? Well, we just do it like that. So yeah, you can do this for most of these knobs. You can do it for the harmonizer amount. Can you do it for the width? Oh wow, you can do it for the width. You can do it for basically all your filters. Can you do it for the pluck? Yes, you can. The pluck is kind of a built-in thing to Harmor, where you basically have a low-pass filter that automatically acts like a pluck. So I did not press any buttons to do that. My window's open, just likes to open on its own. Probably because Cortana's probably going to tell me something. And good God, I hate Cortana for it. Oh, why? Like why? Why would you automatically decide to open that and show me that? Why? You won't even close. There we go. So when this is at full, nothing's happening, but when you turn it low down. So that's basically kind of like a built-in thing with Harmor. There's not much else you can do with it, except I believe there is somewhere where you can change the kind of filter. Pluck shape, that's it. So this is what it is by default. Obviously the bottom means it sets the volume to 0 the fastest, so I can kind of actually mess around with that. The only real interesting thing you can do with pluck is stuff like messing around with its shape. So yeah, you can do some weird stuff with pluck. Then finally, oh yeah, legato, I kind of went over this one. I don't really use this. This is so that you can have notes slide to other notes whenever you have them overlap. Like if you're holding a C note and you have legato mode on, and then you switch to an E. If you have the legato mode on, instead of starting to play a second note, it would change that C note to an E note, and it would slide to it slowly. Now that might sound really useful, but here's the thing. You can already do that in the piano roll anyway. The only reason you would want legato mode on a synth is if it doesn't work with the pitch shifting mode automatically built into FL Studio's piano roll, which most third-party synths don't, but Harmor isn't a third-party synth, so there's basically no reason to use it. It would be much easier to just... If you press Shift S, you see this highlights. Whoops. You can see we slide to it. Oh yeah, just a quick disclaimer. You can also just click that if you don't want to use Shift S, and also those won't make any sound on their own. You have to already be playing a note for the slide notes to do anything. If you have multiple notes playing as well, they'll all slide to the same slide note. The only way to get around that is to change the MIDI channel. So you may be like, what the hell is that all about? Well, you might have noticed that you can click on this and change the colour of your notes. And you might have wondered why the hell you want to do that and how that's important. And what does all this mean? Well, I'm not going to lie, I don't know what all this means. But essentially, MIDI is the file format for these notes basically. And I think the reason why these have these things written on them is because I don't know all how these work, but some synthesizers will use certain channels as like presets. We always use, not presets, as kind of like, we always use this channel to mean this. So I think it's basically saying you might have a synthesizer where this 12th channel doesn't do anything, seemingly, and if it does, it's probably to control the art priority of the synth and not actually to be used for notes and stuff like that. But I think most of the time, every time I've used these channels that have words on them, they've just worked normally, so I don't think I would run into those problems. But anyway, either way, these are all just different MIDI channels. They really just change the colour of your notes. The only thing that could be different is, as I say, if you have a slide note, it will make every single note on that channel slide to it if you've got multiple notes playing at once. So if you want each note to slide individually, like if you've got a chord of 3 notes and you want all 3 notes to slide down one, then you should use different notes for each note in the different colours for each note in the chord to be able to do that. Anyway, I'm kind of getting sidetracked there. So legato is not important. This, on the other hand, is quite important. We've got pitch, which is pretty normal. And we can divide it. But where it gets more interesting is detune. You may be thinking, well, what's detune? Well, let's go back to B to like demonstrate that. Let's turn off this. Halve the detune. Oh, that's low. Oh, what's going on over here? That doesn't even really sound very detuned. What's going on here? Okay, that sounds a bit more detuned. What if we set it to 2? That sounds basically exactly like a square wave. So what's this detune thing all about? Well, basically, it's actually a little bit of a weird name because it's not really detuning it. Essentially, what it's doing is it's a multiplier for the gap between harmonics. If I set this to 2, then the gap between each harmonic is doubled. So yeah, the reason why that sounds so much like a square wave is because a saw wave with the gap between each of its harmonic doubled essentially is a square wave, except for it will have more higher volume on its higher harmonics, but most of the highest harmonics you can't even really hear anyway. So, you know, it doesn't really matter that much. It essentially is just a square wave. I usually use this just if I want some really low-pitched saw bass kind of stuff. I like to use half detune combined with this. It's still going. I let go of the note. I don't know what that was. Anyway, but yeah, I forgot to actually get back to this phase thing. So I believe the starting phase is just saying, hey, where in the sound wave do you want to start? And since it's at 180, it means that's probably why the phase thing is here, because it's in relation to this. So 180 just means start from the middle. So it's starting the saw wave from this point up here. The phase randomness doesn't do anything at this point, really. Well, it randomizes when the waveform will start, but really when it starts and randomizing when it starts, it really doesn't change the sound like at all. You can't notice the difference because it is still the same sound. It just starts from a different place. But since it's restarting like thousands of times a second, like before you've even realised it's not starting from the right place, even if you can realise that, it's already repeated itself like a million times, so it hardly matters. It matters when you have multiple things playing at the same time, which is where the whole unison thing comes in, where if I turn the phase all the way up on this, by the way, I will admit I don't really know what it means by jump ahead and equal spread. I think, I can only guess, I don't know why it'd be called jump ahead, but I think that if you have equal spread, instead of oh, sorry, man. If you have equal spread, instead of it what it would usually do, which is I'm pretty sure that unison's usually most synthesizers is random, like the amount, like you're basically just setting the boundaries for things for like how far it can randomly go up or down. With equal spread, I think it is basically divides the range you have up perfectly between the 9 voices, so that they're all kind of spaced out as far away as they could be possibly for 9 voices within one oscillation. And then jump ahead. Again, I don't know because jump ahead doesn't sound like it fit this, but I think jump ahead just means the same but random. And then full blur. I mean, I consider that the same as 100. I think that's just 100% jump ahead. Anyway, you can use phase randomness with this. The spectral random and running random. Honestly, I don't really notice the difference, but spectral random sounds better to me. It just sounds a bit smoother, but I'm not really sure how it works. Essentially, it just randomly chooses where the sound waves for each unison voice start from, which is good if you want to make it sound more smooth. You can hear it's still there somewhat, but it's nowhere near got that kind of effect that we had before when the phase. Why is the C note? That is weird. I'm tapping the C note, and now it's working, but that's 3 times now that I've tapped the C note, and it's just kept playing it. That's weird. I've never had that before. But yeah, it's still not super smooth, but it's smoother than before for sure. Having it like that, whereas as opposed to. And without the phase randomness, it sounds like this. It's basically the same, but there's a small difference, and I think it makes it sound better. Also, having different panning can kind of soften the effect of having it like this. Like it's still there, but it softens it because you kind of got 2 audio channels there, and they don't fight as much if they got their own audio channels. So if this was 2 voices, it basically gets rid of that effect, because instead of having 2 voices fighting against each other, we basically just have 2 voices on 2 different audio channels that aren't fighting at all against each other. So yeah, whereas this, we still get the effect. Anyway, is that it? No, that's almost it. We got the phaser to do, and this is just a mix knob for the local EQ and the global EQ, I think. So the phaser is interesting on this, because what the phaser is doing is actually not being a phaser technically, it's being a filter. So basically what a phaser is, let's just quickly get that out of the way. I'm going to put, again, don't worry about doing this yet, because I'm just doing this example. So that's the effect a phaser has. So what does a phaser actually do? Well, it does more than this technically, but in general what it does is it's basically unison. It creates another copy of the sound. It's exactly the same, except it starts a teeny tiny bit later than the original sound, milliseconds later, and it creates that effect. It was actually one of the older kind of discovered things, because obviously you could technically just achieve that again by playing recordings of a sound really close to each other, so it was really interesting. So yeah, Harmor here has an inbuilt phaser, but it's technically not a phaser, because I think it's basically just to save computing power, because it can already take quite a lot of computing power if you're at full unison. Instead of creating a copy of the sound, because again that's doubling the amount of sine waves you need again, what it's doing is it's acting as a filter. This is literally just a filter, except it figures out just with maths magic if I did have a copy of the sound, how would it affect the frequencies of it, and it figures out which frequencies it would, reduce, and then makes a filter that cuts out those frequencies. So it sounds like this, as opposed to, do be honest, this isn't sounding too different. Oh wait, do I still have B on. As opposed to... So yeah, it does basically have that effect, but you can see the filter kind of moving here. Now what's cool is, because this is like a filter, they actually do let us mess around with this a lot like it is a filter, even though it's not supposed to, even though it's supposed to be a phaser. So we can mess around with the speed of the filter, and even reverse its direction. Or even put it in place. There's also keyboard tracking on this. Enjoy that. There's the keyboard tracking could also go to -200% and 200%, you know. There's the offset, which is basically, I wouldn't really use this knob much, but it controls where it starts from. Didn't really do much though. The width, which I forget which direction is which all the time. But so when it's at full, they've got very small gaps of frequencies that are very close together, and when it's at minimum, it's got very large gaps of frequencies that are very far together. Now, there's different kinds of phasers. The frequency one is weird as hell, and I do not get it, but you can mess around with it if you want. I can only guess that what this is doing is following this shape, because you can mess around with this shape if you want. Following that shape, it will, I think it essentially applies the filter, except instead of it being a filter, it's now basically a pitch difference. So basically, I think it's affecting the frequencies following this shape in the kind of pattern the phaser would filter them, which is a bit weird. And custom is, I just realised custom got mixed up. The custom is what uses the phaser shape. Wait, I think it uses both. Sorry, I think this phaser shape uses both frequency and custom actually, so that's weird. Anyway, so most of the other modes are basically just different kind of intensities and different shapes. The one I'd use the most is deeper, because that's kind of the most intense one. But there's also, is it condom? Is condom a good one? This is what I'd call a tight one, because as you can see, it very quickly goes from having volume to no volume. So I don't like this one that much, but I think it has utility. It was a box as well. I think it was a box I was thinking of instead of condom, because this one is like, just, it snaps into place. I feel like there's still one I'm forgetting. Is eggs any good? No, eggs is basically just like the normal one. But yeah, I would use deeper the most. But this is where it gets kind of interesting. This is one little extra trick I'd like to tell you about, which is you can have the keyboard tracking for this work on different kind of basis for different things. So by default, it's by octaves, and I think basically what I mean by that is basically it's pitch, which it makes sense to do it by pitch. But then you can also do it by hertz, and obviously hertz is a little bit different from pitch, because although frequency is just pitch, with pitch there's you kind of consider the distance between C5 and C6, and the difference between C6 and C7 the same distance, whereas in terms of frequencies the difference from C6 to C7 would be twice as much as the difference from C5 to C6. So that means that it doesn't really scale quite as well. But the most interesting one is the harmonic one, because you can mess with harmonics using this using pitch thing, and basically have different amounts of phaser kind of with things going on with the keyboard tracking for different harmonics, and it's just cool. Just a moment. So we're going to turn up the keyboard tracking to 200% because we just want to have a lot of movement, and we're going to make this a fast filter. Okay. So if you're wondering what the hell's going on there, basically now the unison pitch thickness, because it affects the pitch of the harmonics, and the pitch of the harmonics is now what's deciding the place of the phaser. It's doing some weird stuff whenever we mess around with the pitch thickness, because that's moving the places of the harmonics, which then in turn moves the phaser. So you get some weird stuff. By the way, I can't take full credit for this. Seamless is the person who introduced me to the fact this existed. What does it sound like with hertz? So cool. You get the point, but yeah, it's some cool stuff. So anyway, is that it? Oh no, I knew there was one more thing I wanted to do. So I wanted to just quickly show you basically what I mean by a supersaw and all that, because I don't think I've mentioned supersaws yet in the tutorial, except just in this episode. Supersaws is just a name that we give to saws with loads of unison. And we usually use them to play big chords in kind of any kind of electronic track. So that's what I mean by supersaw. Now, I just wanted to kind of demonstrate that, because the reason why Harm is so good for this, one is the harmonizer, because although that's technically not usually part of a supersaw, it tends to sound really nice. But just in general, the way the hertz always sound in Harmer, not as much. That's too much. from there you can kind of add some... Oh yeah, I didn't really get into the effects section. It's just a bunch of effects built into Harmor. Don't really worry about this yet, because you're going to learn what these effects do anyway when you get into mixing. But I can turn it on here. So yeah, you get the point. So that's kind of how you make that kind of sound. But I imagine in the future I'll have a more detailed tutorial on how to make a good super saw. So anyway, this is probably a little bit of a long episode. I haven't been keeping track of time, but I imagine it's been quite a long one. So thank you for sitting through all that. Hopefully you feel a lot more informed, because I think this should be a big turning point for you, where in terms of sound design at least, you should feel a lot more confident. If not, definitely, don't feel scared to comment on anything so that I can help you out. Anyway, thank you for watching. Goodbye.